I'm Kathy Mayo. I'm 76. I'm the mom of two grown adults. I'm a retired outreach librarian, and I've been the president off and on of Lee County now for a number of years. And I'm delighted to work with Women's March Fort Myers because that's a great partnership with now. And so today we're going to be talking with my daughter and with me about the issues that we're concerned about right now and maybe how we got to that point. Um, Giuliana.
Sure, I'm Giuliana Mayo. I'm 45 and I am a freelance journalist based in Los Angeles, California.
Well, I started to think, how did we get to this point? And I know that I grew up in Miami Beach in Coral Gables in a family that volunteered. Everybody volunteered through a church, through Lions Club, through helping neighbors and family. I have vivid memories of my grandfather. Once he retired, he would go spend a month with family members repairing everything in their house and doing all kinds of work that they needed done. And then he'd come back home in his big old 1972 Cadillac and you know, he'd take a break and then he'd go back to see some other relative who needed his help. And that was really contagious, volunteering. And I realized that we may not have all volunteered for the same kinds of issues, but there was something that sort of made me think that volunteering was the way to go. I know in high school I was in charge of our philanthropy for a girls' club, and it included working with migrant families down in the Redlands area. And it was much to the dismay of the adult leader of the group. She thought it was not our role as young women to be working with families who we couldn't even communicate with too well. And I knew something was wrong with that. And later in a sorority at FSU, I continued that role. I got all the girls to donate blood, which was like an amazing feat. And we took on arranging all the entertainment for the federal prison in Tallahassee. We got all kinds of groups involved in doing that. So that was a fun part of my life. But I know there was a real turning point in 1972 when I was gang raped um, down at the beach south of Tallahassee. And it's then that I discovered the power of talking and convincing people because I was able to take a very bad situation and control it enough that I didn't get hurt, physically hurt. And I managed to do that again when I was assaulted a number of years later. At first, I realized there was no etiquette for how you talk about being raped. I mean, so it took me a little while, I'd say a year or two before I was comfortable talking about it. And then I became a spokesperson for a lot of rape issues, including here in Fort Myers. I was the spokesperson for the group that got the Rape Crisis Center started. And I would tell my story and talk about how important it would have been had there been a rape crisis center then. That was an interesting experience. As a librarian, I worked with lots of state institutions, prisons, mental health treatment facilities, and all. And I saw a lot of women, particularly in the prisons, who they didn't get their fair share of anything. Um, they didn't get period products. They didn't get, they had to buy everything. And um, it was a bad situation for them. And I realized there ought to be something I could do to make a difference. And so that's how it started with them. I got involved with NOW back in the early 80s in Tallahassee. And then when we moved here in 89 with the local chapter in Lee County. And most recently, we've been very involved in trying to get the um, Amendment 4 passed in Florida because we have a legislature and a governor that think they know better than women about what they need for their bodies, for their health care. And so we've got to turn that around. And we hear that, during every election period, oh, this is the most important election we've had. And I'm beginning to think that right now is really the most important election. Um, in 2024, we will need to, all of us, work together to keep America a democracy. We can't sit this one out. And that's where I'm putting my efforts right now, is to save reproductive rights and try and save what we've got left of democracy.
Issues that are important to me right now.
Yeah,
Obviously, reproductive rights are incredibly important to me. Um, it's really scary. It's really scary to think that this can all go away. Um, Having needed to have an abortion and gotten help through Planned Parenthood. I just, like I wouldn't want anybody to be forced to have a kid, and hearing these stories out of Texas about women who can't even get abortions with ectopic pregnancies. It's just really frightening what losing Roe has done to the country.
absolutely.
But I think another issue I became really aware of during the pandemic was just pay equity. I had so many friends whose husbands made more than they did. So they had to quit their jobs and stay home and take care of the kids because kids weren't in school. And I've seen how much that set them back and how much pressure that put on them. And, I have other friends who have stayed in relationships because they don't make as much money as their partner and they need that financial support. So even though they're not in a good place, they're staying so that their bills are paid. And I don't think I ever understood it until fairly recently, just like how absolutely important pay equity is. Those are
And
my two.
equal pay in California is very different from what it is here. I mean, you have to make so much more
Yeah.
just to survive.
Yeah. I mean, I have a friend who filed for bankruptcy because she got a divorce and, couldn't get enough from him to not go bankrupt. It's just crazy the positions that women have been put in because we aren't paid for the same amount of work that we do. I mean, I've experienced that over and over in my life. Even when I owned a business, my partner, who was male, was always assumed to be my boss and not my partner. People thought I was his secretary or his assistant for 13 years, and it's just kind of maddening. So when we parted ways as a company, I couldn't leave on equal footing. He could leave and always have been the face of this company, but no one had ever seen me for what I did. So I couldn't just start another company. I couldn't just be back in that place where I was. It was going from, back to zero, which isn't paid, but it's just sexism that, really affected me professionally.
And you were working in the clothing business.
Right.
Which,
I'm a fashion designer and
yeah.
like I'm the assistant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all the people who worked for you were pretty much recent immigrants, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I employed lots of people from Guatemala, and they were all male and they all treated me, like I was less than my male partner. Like it was a forever issue for 13 years. And, part of that was him allowing it. But part of that is just our societal sexism. And it's really difficult really difficult. We had so many arguments about it. And so that was one thing. But like then seeing all my friends during the pandemic get hit by pay inequity and what it meant, it's come to the forefront of my mind as a very important issue for women.
Yeah. I saw so much, you going through so much during the strike out there. Um, your husband was on strike as a screenwriter, and you had to work through how to support your, well, whether you would stick with the union and whether they were going to stand up for you all in your job at KCRW. That was,
And they
yeah,
did.
crazy. And they didn't.
And they didn't. So we hear all this stuff. I was finally in a union and I was so excited to be a part of it. And then as it turns out, unions don't always stand up for you. Sometimes they bow to
Mm.
the powers that be to keep jobs for themselves. So yeah, while I was watching this major force happen with the Writers Guild and with SAG and seeing real change coming to Hollywood, at the exact same time, our union was doing the opposite, and it was really disheartening.
Has your feelings about unions changed, or what what would you do differently now?
I don't know what I would do differently because I was incredibly outspoken and willing to fight, and I just couldn't get anyone, I couldn't get the powers that be to follow along. So I guess if you can't get the majority of people to support you, you're screwed, and that's basically what happened to so many of us.
Tell us about your experience with the moth.
The
Um, I I love listening to the moth, but I don't get to see you very often in that role. But you've taken on some interesting storytelling there.
I think growing up in the South, um, there was so much storytelling growing up,
Mhm.
like we would go to storytelling festivals and there's people reading books all the time. And, like there's just, good old boys like our neighbor Rick telling tales and things like that. So I think it's a part of, always been a part of my life. And when I
Mhm.
heard about the moth, it became something that I really wanted to do. I was on a date with this guy who did it a lot and he told me about it and we didn't date anymore, but I went to the moth and started telling stories because he introduced me to the phenomenon. Yeah, I've told stories about all kinds of things. And I won in New York for a story about getting my abortion and the importance of Planned Parenthood. And that was really cool to like get to and afterwards I'm so weepy. But afterwards, all these women came up to me, speaking of like the importance of talking about experience, and we're just
Mhm.
like, "Thank you so much," like it's just, and they told me their stories and felt comfortable telling me their stories because I had shared my story of having an abortion, and it was just, yeah, it was really special experience. So I guess that's why I keep going. I've been going since 2009.
Ah, longer than I realized.
Yeah.
Whoa.
And that's how I got into the radio, and that's how yeah, my career change happened actually, was telling stories.
And you do it well. Um, I know you have interviewed some really interesting people on the radio.
I have interviewed a lot of interesting people. Dolores Puerto was definitely a bucket list, just amazing experience. She has so much energy still in her 90s. And I went to a meeting where she was speaking, and she just had the whole crowd riled up and chanting Si se pueda. And it was just like, wow, what the inspiration that she remains to so many people. It was just amazing. And then getting to sit in a room with her and talk about, we were talking about housing issues for farm workers in California. And she knows the policy inside and out. She's sharp as a tack. And she knows the history, going back to the 50s and 60s. So she was a really valuable interview, and it was also just a really special experience.
Any other women that that made an impact?
I interviewed this woman last year. Her name's Sue Carpenter, and she ran a pirate radio station in Los Angeles in the 1990s, if, avoiding the FCC for, I want to say, 3 years. And she just wanted to hear stuff on the radio that she wasn't hearing. This is like when everything was, they were becoming monopolies on the radio, right? So you were just getting the same sounds everywhere. And she just decided as one woman to start a radio station, a pirate radio station out of her closet in her apartment. She's in her 20s. And it turned into this 24-hour a day, 7 days a week radio station that like some of the most famous bands in the world came through. And like all of these amazing people had from the community had shows, and it was just so cool to see somebody who had this idea and rally the whole community behind her and turn it into something that Rolling Stone is covering, and
Yeah.
like that everyone around the world is hearing about. And it was just one woman in an apartment in Silver Lake, you know and she's like climbing up to the top of her roof to get a higher signal as like demand grows, and then she's bouncing the signal off of like a skyscraper on Hollywood and Vine, and that she like sneaks up to the top of. It's just like she did this amazing thing, and people still talk about it. It's just really, really cool. So she's just a force, kind of like Dolores. It's not political in any way, but it was just
Yeah.
really, really neat to see how she grew from one person to creating a whole community around just like the love of music.
Important stuff. It's often like that.
Mhm.
It's taking one idea and getting people excited about it and
Yeah,
going
that's
from
the
there.
gift, I think, getting people to buy in and to participate,
Mhm.
and yeah, to give a shit. And
Yeah.
so when you see people who can do that, I think it's really impressive.
Well,
Who
any
else?
hope? Any hopes for the next few months until the election?
No. I, I was really scared when I saw that they announced that it was going to be Harris, because coming from Florida and the sexism, especially there, I mean, there's a reason that I live in California. It is because
Mhm.
the climate that we are facing nationally is what I was living in the late 90s. And I didn't want to be a part of it. I didn't want to live in opposition to the society around me. I wanted to be around people who were different, and and had and looked different and held different beliefs. And Florida was really all about this homogenization of white conservative culture. And it's terrifying to me that it has taken over our national politics, and that this is like what the world looks like. So when I heard Harris announced, I have to say that it was a gut punch to me. I almost cried. I was like, not a woman. I was so scared. And it's been so amazing to see how people are really rallying behind her,
Yeah.
because I wasn't sure that that was going to happen.
Yeah.
Do you feel hopeful?
I'm feeling hopeful. In fact, they're even thinking there's a possibility that the Democrats may carry Florida this year,
Right.
partly because of the abortion issue, which is making people think about what's really important to them. But we'll see what happens. I think it won't happen unless people like us are out there encouraging other folks to speak up and question maybe what they've always thought. Um, yeah, and I'm a sixth generation Floridian and you a seventh. So we have a lot of connection to this state that we care about. But
Yeah.
I worried when our governor DeSantis um, dropped out of the race, and I thought, oh, now he's going to focus on Florida for the next 2.5 years, and he's absolutely done that. And that's something we've got to care about.
Yeah, it's really terrifying what he's been able to do, and to watch it from afar. Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's terrifying. And it's nice to live in a bit of a bubble, but when Roe fell, you realize that you're only so
That's
safe.
right.
And I think we listened to men for years and years say they're never going to overturn it. You know, they're never going to. And nobody understood the fear. Like, well, men especially didn't understand the fear. There,
Yeah.
it just felt like there was this, you know, eye rolling whenever we would talk about it. And so now it feels like maybe the fear is understood and how much more could happen if we don't step up is understood. I hope that is the case.
Well, that seems to be where we are right now. And let's just see what difference we can make. Thank you for talking today.